A lonely cowboy found starving black twin girls huddled in his cabin, but as the blizzard howled outside, he never expected the trembling sisters to change everything he thought he knew about survival. The townspeople of Dusty Creek whispered that such lost souls always disappeared into unmarked graves by spring. The educated sister would surely follow that same bitter fate, her refined words and desperate legal papers meaning nothing in a world built to silence her voice. Yet this weathered drifter, himself cast out from civilized society, saw something the others missed. Hidden within her possession lay documents that could expose the town's most powerful men as thieves and murderers, if she lived long enough to prove it. But with winter tightening its grip and dangerous men closing in, would her intelligence and his protection be enough to survive the conspiracy hunting them both? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The winter of 1887 brought storms that could kill a man in minutes. Eli Monroe had learned to read the sky like scripture, and tonight it promised death. He urged his horse faster toward the distant cabin, snow stinging his face like buckshot. 3 towns had run him out for asking the wrong questions. Dusty Creek would be no different, but at least his cabin offered solitude. The locals called him troublemaker behind his back. They whispered about the worn journal he carried, filled with dreams they found laughable. Eli pushed through the cabin door and froze. 2 figures huddled beneath a tattered quilt near his cold fireplace. Girls. Maybe 16, their dark skin ashen with hunger and cold. One held the other protectively, eyes fierce despite their desperate condition. The protective sister spoke first. Her voice carried an education that didn't match her ragged appearance. The quieter twin watched everything with calculating eyes, saying nothing but missing nothing. Eli built up the fire without questions. He heated water and found what food he could spare. The girls ate slowly, carefully like people who had learned hunger could return without warning. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged outside, fragments of their story emerged. They had escaped from something they called the work camp during the blizzard. The protective sister, clearly the spokesperson, spoke of brutal conditions and illegal operations. Her refined vocabulary seemed impossible given their circumstances. The quiet twin kept a small journal hidden in her dress, writing when she thought no one was watching. When the storm finally broke, Eli knew he had a choice. Leave them to face the elements alone, or bring them to town and face the consequences himself. Dusty Creek had little patience for outsiders, especially ones who looked different and asked uncomfortable questions. The ride to town revealed the sisters' dynamic clearly. The educated one made decisions and spoke for both. The observer documented everything silently, her journal always within reach. Neither seemed surprised by hardship, but both showed a determination that impressed Eli. Dusty Creek's main street buzzed with post-storm activity. Shopkeepers swept snow from their storefronts. Men gathered outside the saloon, discussing damage to their properties. The arrival of Eli and the twins brought immediate attention. Conversations stopped. Stares followed their progress down the street. Some faces showed curiosity. Others displayed open hostility. The twins sat straighter in the saddle, meeting every gaze with dignity that seemed to unnerve the onlookers. At the general store, the educated sister surprised everyone by speaking with perfect grammar and obvious intelligence. She asked specific questions about territorial law and property records. The storekeeper's confusion was evident. This wasn't what anyone expected from desperate refugees. Widow Cartwright emerged from the crowd that had gathered. The elderly woman studied the twins with shrewd eyes, particularly noting how the educated sister carried herself. She offered the use of her spare room without explanation, ignoring the disapproving murmurs from other townspeople. Sheriff Buck Hathaway approached with obvious reluctance. His badge caught the afternoon sun as he questioned them about the work camp. The educated sister provided detailed answers about locations and illegal activities. Her knowledge seemed too comprehensive, too specific for a simple escapee. The sheriff's discomfort grew with each answer. His duty demanded investigation, but his position in town required careful navigation of local politics. The twins' accusations could upset powerful people who preferred certain activities remain unexamined. As word spread about the newcomers, reactions polarized quickly. Some families showed quiet sympathy. remembering their own struggles with hunger and displacement. Others muttered about troublemakers and unwanted attention from territorial authorities. The town council convened an emergency session that evening. Through Widow Cartwright's kitchen window, Eli could see the lamplight in the meeting hall burning late into the night. The educated sister noticed too, her expression growing more thoughtful and determined. By the second day, something unexpected began happening. The educated sister started helping townspeople with reading and writing tasks. Her expertise with legal documents became apparent as she assisted families with property deeds and territorial paperwork. Her refined knowledge impressed even skeptical residents. The quiet twin continued her careful documentation, but now she observed the entire town, rather than just their immediate situation. Her journal grew thicker with detailed notes about people, places, and overheard conversations. She missed nothing and forgot less. Eli found himself drawn deeper into their situation despite the growing social pressure. Other townspeople made their disapproval clear through cold shoulders and pointed comments. His association with the twins marked him as even more of an outsider than before. The educated sister began dropping hints about important papers she carried. She spoke carefully about land rights and territorial claims, never revealing specifics but suggesting knowledge that made certain town council members visibly uncomfortable during chance encounters on the street. Sheriff Hathaway started asking his own quiet questions around town. The twins' detailed knowledge of the work camp's operations troubled him more than he admitted publicly. Their descriptions matched reports he had received from other sources, reports he had been instructed to ignore. As the third day ended, tension filled the air like smoke from a distant fire. The twins had survived their immediate crisis, but something larger was building. The educated sister's mysterious documents and extensive legal knowledge threatened to expose secrets that powerful people had worked hard to bury. The question hanging over Dusty Creek was no longer whether the twins would survive the winter, but whether the town itself could survive the truth they might reveal. Widow Cartwright's house overflowed with territorial documents that morning. Legal papers covered every surface of her kitchen table. The educated sister moved through them with startling efficiency, organizing deeds and claims with the precision of a trained professional. Her knowledge ran deeper than anyone had imagined. She identified discrepancies in property boundaries that had confused territorial clerks for months. She corrected legal language that even the town's lawyer had struggled with. Her expertise was undeniable and impossible to explain. The quiet twin sat nearby, her journal open, documenting every detail of the legal papers spread before them. Her pen moved constantly, capturing names, dates, and property descriptions with meticulous care. She had been recording everything since their arrival, building a comprehensive record that no one else had noticed. Widow Cartwright watched the sisters work with growing amazement. She had lived in this territory for 30 years and had never seen anyone navigate legal documents with such skill. The educated sister's abilities far exceeded what any refugee from a work camp should possess. The morning's revelation came when the educated sister pulled folded papers from the lining of her worn dress. The documents were carefully preserved despite her ordeal. She spread them on the table with hands that trembled slightly, not from cold or hunger, but from the weight of what she was revealing. The first document was a teacher's certificate from a respected institution back east. The name, written in careful script, belonged to the educated sister. The credentials were legitimate and impressive, far beyond what most frontier teachers possessed. The second document was a property deed. The land described encompassed a significant portion of the territory surrounding Dusty Creek, including areas where mining operations had been conducted. The deed was legally valid and properly notarized, dating back several months before the sisters' disappearance. Widow Cartwright examined the papers with the careful attention of someone who understood their implications. The educated sister was not just a refugee. She was a property owner with legal rights that extended far beyond what anyone had suspected. The quiet twins' journal suddenly took on new meaning. She had been documenting not just their experiences, but evidence. Her careful notes about the work camp, the illegal mining operations, and the people involved were building a legal case that could shake the foundation of Dusty Creek's power structure. The educated sister explained her story in measured tones. She had been traveling to establish a school for freed slaves when she and her twin were kidnapped. The work camp was their destination, turned into their prison. The land they had been forced to work belonged to her, legally purchased with money she had saved from years of teaching. Her captors knew about the land deed. The kidnapping was not random. Someone had specifically targeted her to prevent her from claiming her property and establishing her school. The illegal mining operations had been extracting valuable resources from land that rightfully belonged to her. The implications spread through the room like ripples in still water. If the educated sister's land claim was legitimate, then months of mining operations had been theft on a massive scale. The profits from those operations had flowed to someone in town, someone with enough power to organize kidnapping and forced labor. Widow Cartwright's expression grew grave as she studied the territorial maps alongside the property deed. The educated sister's land included areas that the town council had recently approved for expanded mining operations. Permits had been issued and profits distributed based on claims that were apparently fraudulent. The quiet twin showed them her journal entries from the work camp. Her careful handwriting detailed the mining operations, the amount of materials extracted, and the overseers who managed the illegal activities. She had recorded names, dates, and descriptions that could identify everyone involved in the conspiracy. Word of the morning's discoveries spread through town faster than news of a gold strike. The educated sister's true identity as a property owner changed everything. She was not a refugee seeking charity, but a victim of theft seeking justice. Some townspeople reacted with shame at their previous treatment of the sisters. Others responded with fear about what the revelations might mean for their own situations. A few showed anger at being deceived about the true ownership of land they thought belonged to the territory. Sheriff Hathaway arrived at Widow Cartwright's house within an hour of the news spreading. He examined the documents with the careful attention of a lawman who recognized genuine legal trouble. The property deed was legitimate. The teacher's certificate was authentic. The journal entries provided detailed evidence of criminal activity. The sheriff's investigation of the work camp suddenly took on new urgency. What he had assumed was simple illegal labor was actually organized theft and kidnapping. The scope of the crimes extended far beyond what he had imagined, reaching into the heart of Dusty Creek's business community. Eli watched the transformation with amazement. The twins he had found starving in his cabin were revealing themselves as educated professionals with legal standing and documented evidence of major crimes. Their survival story was becoming an exposé of corruption that threatened to reshape the entire territory. The town council called another emergency meeting that afternoon. This time, the lamps burned bright enough to be seen from every house in Dusty Creek. The educated sisters' revelations had created a crisis that demanded immediate response. The question was no longer whether the twins could survive in Dusty Creek, but whether Dusty Creek could survive the legal reckoning that the twins were prepared to unleash. The educated sister's strategy unfolded like a carefully planned chess game. She began visiting families throughout Dusty Creek, offering to help with legal documents that had puzzled them for months. Her expertise with territorial law proved invaluable to people who had struggled with bureaucratic language they could not understand. The Hendersons had been fighting a property boundary dispute for over a year. She reviewed their papers and identified the exact legal precedent that resolved their case. The Millers had lost money on a contract they thought was legitimate. She showed them the deceptive clauses that invalidated the agreement and explained how to seek compensation. Each family she helped became a supporter. Word spread about her abilities. People who had initially viewed the twins with suspicion began seeking their assistance with various legal problems that had seemed impossible to solve. The quiet twin played her role perfectly. While her sister worked with families, she documented everything in her expanding journal. Names, dates, legal issues, family connections, and business relationships all found their way into her detailed records. Her observations revealed patterns that others had missed. By the end of the first week, the educated sister had helped 12 families resolve legal problems that had cost them money and caused stress for months. Her reputation as a problem solver grew stronger with each success. Even skeptical townspeople had to acknowledge her obvious expertise and genuine desire to help. The unofficial school began almost by accident. The educated sister was helping the Cooper family with their land deed when their youngest son asked her to explain a difficult word. She spent 20 minutes teaching him to read the legal language, breaking down complex terms into concepts a child could understand. Mrs. Cooper mentioned the lesson to other mothers. Soon, several families were asking if the educated sister could teach their children as well. She agreed enthusiastically, transforming Widow Cartwright's front parlor into a makeshift classroom where children learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, with methods more advanced than anything they had experienced before. Her teaching credentials became undeniable as parents watched their children's rapid progress. She used techniques that engaged young minds and made learning enjoyable. Children who had struggled with basic reading were soon tackling more complex material with confidence and enthusiasm. The opposition's response was swift and organized. 3 town council members began visiting families who had used the educated sisters' services. They suggested that outsiders who stirred up legal questions might bring unwanted attention from territorial authorities. They implied that too much change too quickly could destabilize the community's prosperity. Local business owners started pressuring families to stop using the educated sisters' legal services. They argued that established relationships with existing lawyers and officials should be maintained. They warned that property disputes could become more complicated if too many old agreements were questioned simultaneously. Anonymous messages appeared around town questioning the twins' true motives. Notes suggested that their legal expertise was being used to identify valuable properties for their own benefit. Rumors spread about outsiders who had disrupted other communities before moving on to their next targets. Sheriff Hathaway found himself caught between competing pressures. His investigation of the work camp had revealed evidence of serious crimes, but he was receiving direct orders from territorial officials to focus on maintaining community stability rather than pursuing prosecutions that could take years to resolve. The town council increased their pressure on the sheriff to limit his investigation. They argued that pursuing old complaints about work camps that no longer operated would waste resources that could be better used addressing current community needs. They suggested that the twins' accusations were probably exaggerated due to trauma and desperation. More survivors from the work camp began arriving in Dusty Creek as spring weather made travel possible. Each new arrival corroborated the twins' account of illegal mining operations and forced labor. Their testimonies provided additional evidence that supported the educated sisters' legal claims. The Quiet Twins' journal became crucial as more survivors shared their experiences. She recorded each testimony with careful attention to details that could be verified independently. Her documentation created a comprehensive record of criminal activities that extended far beyond simple labor violations. Widow Cartwright provided access to historical territorial records stored in her home's basement. The educated sister discovered that multiple property deeds had been altered or misrepresented over the past 2 years. The pattern suggested systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents of corruption. The discrepancies between original property records and current claims revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Several valuable mining sites were being operated under fraudulent ownership claims. The profits from these operations had been flowing to people who had no legal right to the resources they were extracting. Eli's commitment to supporting the twins deepened as he witnessed their impact on the community. Despite increasing social pressure to distance himself from them, he helped the educated sister research property records and gather evidence. His journal, once filled with lonely wandering plans, now contained detailed notes about legal research and community development. The twins' presence was transforming Dusty Creek in ways no one had anticipated. Families were resolving legal problems that had plagued them for years. Children were receiving education that exceeded anything previously available in the territory. Long-standing questions about property rights were finally being addressed with expert knowledge. But the transformation was creating resistance from those who benefited from the previous system of confusion and exploitation. The battle lines were forming between those who welcomed the twins' expertise and those who feared the consequences of too much legal clarity and education. The educated sister's success was making enemies of powerful people who had profited from keeping others ignorant and legally vulnerable. The question was whether her growing support base would be strong enough to protect her when those enemies decided to act. Sheriff Hathaway's investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered financial records hidden in the abandoned work camp. The documents revealed sophisticated accounting that tracked extracted resources, labor costs, and profit distributions. This was not simple illegal mining. Someone had been running a complex business operation disguised as forced labor. The financial records showed payments to 3 different bank accounts in Dusty Creek. The amounts were substantial, far exceeding what any legitimate mining operation in the territory should have generated. The timing of the payments corresponded exactly with the periods when the work camp had been most active. Widow Cartwright made a disturbing discovery in her basement archives. Original territorial property deeds from 2 years ago showed completely different ownership patterns than the current official records. Someone had been systematically altering legal documents to transfer valuable mining rights from legitimate owners to unknown parties. The pattern was becoming clear. The educated sister's kidnapping had not been an isolated crime. Multiple property owners had disappeared or been driven away just before valuable resources were discovered on their land. The work camp had provided both the labor to extract resources and the cover story to explain why legitimate owners were no longer present. The quiet twins' journal entries from other survivors revealed the full scope of the operation. At least 8 different properties had been stolen through kidnapping, intimidation, or fraudulent legal manipulation. The educated sister's land was just the most recent target in a systematic campaign of theft that had been operating for over 2 years. Sheriff Hathaway faced a moment of truth when Mayor Cornelius Blackwood summoned him to a private meeting. The mayor, flanked by council members Preston Hartwell and Douglas Stanton, made their position clear. The investigation was creating instability that threatened the town's economic future. Territorial authorities were asking uncomfortable questions that could damage Dusty Creek's reputation. The pressure on the sheriff intensified when he was offered a transfer to a larger town with better pay and opportunities for advancement. The offer came with the clear implication that accepting it would solve everyone's problems. The twins' accusations could be handled quietly by his replacement, someone less invested in pursuing complicated prosecutions. Hathaway's decision came after reviewing the financial records one more time. The bank accounts receiving payments from the work camp belonged to Mayor Blackwood, Preston Hartwell, and Douglas Stanton. The 3 men who were pressuring him to abandon his investigation were the same 3 men who had profited from the criminal operation. The revelation transformed everything. The work camp had not been an independent criminal enterprise that corrupt officials had failed to stop. It had been their criminal enterprise, designed and operated for their direct benefit. They had organized the kidnappings, managed the forced labor, and distributed the profits among themselves. The educated sister's kidnapping made perfect sense now. Her property contained some of the richest mineral deposits in the territory. The 3 conspirators had needed her removed before she could establish legal residence and begin developing her land legitimately. The school she planned to build would have brought territorial attention that could have exposed their entire operation. Widow Cartwright revealed her own suspicions when she showed the sheriff additional documents she had been hiding. Her late husband had been a territorial surveyor who had identified the valuable mineral deposits years before anyone else knew about them. His survey reports had been used to target specific properties for theft. The conspiracy reached back further than anyone had realized. Mayor Blackwood had access to the survey reports through his official position. Hartwell controlled the bank that financed mining operations. Stanton managed the legal paperwork that transferred property rights. Together, they had created a system that could identify, steal, and profit from valuable properties with minimal risk of discovery. Sheriff Hathaway made his choice by secretly contacting territorial authorities directly. He provided them with financial records, altered property deeds, survivor testimonies, and documented evidence of the conspiracy. His report requested immediate investigation and federal intervention to prevent the destruction of evidence. The educated sister received word that territorial investigators would arrive within 2 weeks. Her legal case had grown from a simple property dispute into a federal investigation of organized crime. The evidence she and her sister had gathered was strong enough to support prosecutions that could result in significant prison sentences. The 3 conspirators realized their danger when they learned about the federal investigation. Their attempts to pressure the sheriff had failed. Their offers to relocate the twins had been rejected. Their efforts to discredit the evidence had been unsuccessful. They faced the possibility of losing everything they had built through years of systematic theft. Mayor Blackwood's desperation showed when he approached Eli with an offer to buy the twins' silence. The amount offered was substantial enough to set all three of them up comfortably in any other territory. All they had to do was leave Dusty Creek quietly and agree never to pursue their legal claims. Eli's response was immediate and unequivocal. The twins had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to abandon their quest for justice now. Their evidence could help other victims recover their stolen properties. Their testimony could prevent future crimes. Their courage could transform Dusty Creek from a corrupt outpost into a legitimate community. The battle lines were now completely clear. Federal investigators were coming to examine evidence of systematic fraud and kidnapping. The three most powerful men in Dusty Creek faced the possibility of federal prosecution and prison sentences. The twins who had arrived as starving refugees were now the key witnesses in a case that could reshape the entire territory. The question was no longer whether justice would be served, but whether the conspirators would accept defeat or make one final desperate attempt to protect themselves. The territorial investigators arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change Dusty Creek forever. Marshal William Garrett and his team of federal agents established their temporary headquarters in the town hall, displacing the very council members who had operated their criminal enterprise from those same rooms. The educated sister presented her case with the precision of a trained attorney. She organized her evidence chronologically, starting with her original property purchase and teacher's certification, progressing through the kidnapping and forced labor, and concluding with the financial records that proved systematic theft. Her presentation was methodical, compelling, and devastating. The Quiet Twins' journal became the cornerstone of the federal case. Her detailed documentation provided names, dates, locations, and descriptions that corroborated every major element of the conspiracy. Marshal Garrett had rarely seen such comprehensive evidence compiled by a victim of the crimes being prosecuted. Widow Cartwright testified about the altered property records and provided original documents that contradicted the current official claims. Her basement archives contained territorial surveys, original deeds, and correspondence that proved the conspiracy had been operating for over 2 years. Her testimony established the historical context that made the current crimes possible. Sheriff Hathaway's decision to support federal prosecution transformed him from local lawman to territorial hero. His investigation had provided the financial evidence that connected Mayor Blackwood, Preston Hartwell, and Douglas Stanton directly to the criminal profits. His courage in defying local political pressure impressed the federal investigators. The public hearing drew families from throughout the territory. Work camp survivors testified about the conditions they had endured and the illegal mining operations they had been forced to support. Property owners who had been cheated out of their land shared their stories of intimidation and fraudulent legal manipulation. The evidence against the three conspirators was overwhelming. Bank records showed the flow of criminal profits directly into their personal accounts. Altered property deeds bore their signatures and official seals. Survivor testimonies placed them at the work camp during active operations. Their guilt was established beyond any reasonable doubt. Mayor Blackwood's final attempt at manipulation failed spectacularly. He claimed that the federal investigation was based on the unreliable testimony of traumatized former captives who might have misunderstood what they witnessed. The financial records and forged documents made his defense impossible to maintain. Preston Hartwell tried to shift blame to his co-conspirators, claiming he had only provided banking services without knowing the source of the funds. The detailed financial records showed his active participation in structuring transactions to hide the criminal origins of the money. His defense collapsed under scrutiny. Douglas Stanton's legal expertise became his downfall when investigators demonstrated that the property deed alterations required someone with extensive knowledge of territorial law. His attempts to claim ignorance about legal documents he had personally notarized and filed were met with skeptical laughter from the courtroom. The conspiracy's collapse revealed the full extent of their crimes. 17 different properties had been targeted for theft. 23 people had been kidnapped or driven away from their legitimate claims. The total value of stolen resources exceeded anything the territory had seen in organized crime. Federal charges included kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, theft of federal property, and racketeering. The potential sentences ranged from 20 years to life in federal prison. The three men who had controlled Dusty Creek's politics and economy faced the destruction of everything they had built through criminal enterprise. The community's response split along predictable lines. Families who had been helped by the educated sister celebrated the exposure of corruption that had damaged their community for years. Those who had profited from the conspiracy's operations faced their own legal troubles as accessories to the crimes. Restitution orders required the return of all stolen properties to their legitimate owners. The educated sister recovered her land, along with compensation for the resources that had been illegally extracted. Other victims received similar judgments that restored their property rights and provided financial compensation for their losses. The territorial government appointed Marshal Garrett as the interim administrator for Dusty Creek until new elections could be held. Sheriff Hathaway received promotion to territorial marshal based on his integrity and investigative skills. The federal intervention transformed the town's entire power structure. The educated sister's vindication was complete when territorial authorities officially recognized her teaching credentials and provided funding for the school she had originally planned to establish. Her vision of education for all children, regardless of background, became the centerpiece of Dusty Creek's transformation from corrupt outpost to model community. The quiet twin emerged from her sister's shadow as the appointed administrator for victim compensation and property restoration. Her detailed documentation skills made her invaluable in sorting out the complex legal issues created by years of systematic fraud. Her journal became the official record of the conspiracy's crimes. Eli's transformation from isolated drifter to community leader reflected the changes throughout Dusty Creek. His journal, once filled with lonely, wandering plans, now contained detailed proposals for sustainable development of the recovered properties. His commitment to justice had earned him respect and a permanent place in the community. The trials concluded with maximum sentences for all three conspirators. Mayor Blackwood, Preston Hartwell, and Douglas Stanton would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Their criminal enterprise was completely dismantled, and their ill-gotten gains were distributed to their victims. The educated sister's courage in pursuing justice despite overwhelming odds had exposed corruption that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Her victory established precedents that would protect other communities from similar criminal conspiracies. The starving refugee had become a symbol of justice that would inspire others for years to come. 1 year later, the Spring Festival in Dusty Creek celebrated transformations that seemed impossible just 12 months before. The educated sister stood before a crowd of families whose children had graduated from her newly established school. Their proud faces reflected a community that had embraced education as the foundation for honest prosperity. Sarah Dunbar's school occupied a beautiful new building constructed on her recovered property. The federal compensation money had funded not just the school, but also a library, workshop spaces for practical skills training, and dormitories for students from distant homesteads. Her original vision of education for all children had become reality beyond her wildest dreams. Ruth Dunbar managed the school's administration with the same meticulous attention to detail she had shown in her journal documentation. Her careful records now tracked student progress, community development projects, and the successful restoration of properties to their rightful owners. Her quiet strength had proven essential to the community's healing process. The graduation ceremony showcased achievements that amazed even Sarah. Children who had struggled with basic reading a year ago were now discussing complex literature and territorial history. Students from different backgrounds worked together on science projects and community service initiatives that strengthened bonds throughout the territory. Eli Monroe's transformation from isolated drifter to respected community leader reflected the changes throughout Dusty Creek. His sustainable development of Sarah's property had created jobs for dozens of families while protecting the natural resources that made the land valuable. His approach balanced economic opportunity with environmental responsibility. The mining operations on Sarah's property now employed former work camp survivors alongside local residents who had lost jobs when the criminal enterprise collapsed. Fair wages, safe working conditions, and profit-sharing agreements created a model that other mining operations throughout the territory began adopting. Marshal Buck Hathaway's promotion to territorial law enforcement had brought recognition and resources that strengthened justice throughout the region. His integrity during the conspiracy investigation had earned him appointments to territorial committees that were reforming property law and criminal justice procedures. Widow Cartwright had become the official territorial historian, her basement archives now forming the foundation for a proper historical society. Her documentation of the conspiracy's crimes served as a reference for other investigations throughout the territory. Her role in supporting Sarah and Ruth was recognized with a Territorial Service Award. The community's economic transformation exceeded all expectations. Property values had increased as clear ownership rights replaced the uncertainty created by fraudulent claims. New families moved to Dusty Creek attracted by the quality of education, fair business practices, and strong law enforcement that now characterized the town. The annual festival celebrated not just individual achievements, but community values that had emerged from the struggle against corruption. Booths displayed student artwork, local crafts, agricultural products, and mining samples that represented honest work fairly compensated. The contrast with the previous year's atmosphere of fear and division was remarkable. Sarah's address to the community reflected on the journey from that winter night, when she and Ruth had sought shelter in Eli's cabin. She spoke about the power of education to transform lives, the importance of courage in facing injustice, and the strength that communities gained when they embraced truth over comfortable deception. Ruth presented her compiled journals to the territorial government as the official record of the conspiracy and its aftermath. Her documentation would be used to train law enforcement officers and help other communities identify and combat similar criminal enterprises. Her quiet work had created a legacy that extended far beyond Dusty Creek. The festival's highlight was the announcement of new territorial policies based on lessons learned from the Dusty Creek conspiracy. Property rights procedures were strengthened to prevent fraudulent transfers. Law enforcement training emphasized federal cooperation when local corruption was suspected. Educational funding was increased to ensure that all communities had access to qualified teachers. Former work camp survivors had become productive community members with jobs, homes, and futures they could never have imagined during their captivity. Their testimonies had helped convict other criminal operations throughout the territory. Their recovery demonstrated the healing power of justice combined with community support. The children's performance concluded the festival with songs and recitations that celebrated courage, justice, and community cooperation. Their voices carried hope for a future built on education, rather than exploitation, truth, rather than deception, and cooperation, rather than division. As the sun set on the festival, Sarah stood in her schoolhouse, looking out at the thriving community that had grown from the ashes of corruption. The same woman who had arrived starving and desperate now served as an inspiration to territorial officials planning similar transformations in other communities. Eli's journal, once filled with lonely, wandering plans, now contained detailed records of community development projects that were being replicated throughout the territory. His commitment to supporting Sarah's quest for justice had given him purpose and respect that no amount of solitary drifting could have provided. The evening's quiet conversations revealed the depth of transformation that extended beyond economic and educational improvements. Families spoke about children who were learning to read, property disputes that had been resolved fairly, and hope for futures built on honest work rather than exploitation or deception. Dusty Creek's transformation from corrupt outpost to model community had required courage, intelligence, and persistence from unlikely heroes who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The starving twins who had sought shelter in a lonely cabin had become the foundation for changes that would protect generations of families throughout the territory. The story that began with desperation in a winter storm had become a testament to the power of education, courage, and community cooperation to overcome even the most entrenched corruption.